Today's episode of Locked On Stars is a mailbag episode. We'll be answering varying questions about the Dallas Stars, talk about Val Nichushkin in his time in the Stanley Cup Finals, talk about the future of Scott Wedgewood with the team, and end the show by talking about when we could be seeing some big-name Stars prospects making their NHL debut. All coming up on today's episode of Locked On Stars.
Your Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, credentialed member of the Dallas Stars media, coming to you on this Friday, June 17th. And whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener of Locked On Stars, thank you for stopping in and making us your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe to our show on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform. The best way to help the show grow is by leaving a comment on YouTube or a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. Remember, we are free and available no matter where or how you listen to the show. Without any further hesitation, let's get into today's mailbag episode. And the first question is a Stanley Cup Finals related one. The question is, should we be excited for Valeri Nichushkin as he is displaying a ton of success so far with the Colorado Avalanche this entire season, but most recently in the playoffs and as of Wednesday night in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals. I mean, this is a guy that there's a big what if surrounding his name with Dallas Stars fans. I mean, this was a guy that was drafted 10th overall in 2013, but never really panned out for the Dallas Stars. And now he's a member of this Avalanche team that is now 3 wins away from hoisting the Stanley Cup. And, you know, he was a big player, Nichushkin was, in Game 1 against the Tampa Bay Lightning. He scored a goal to put the Avs up 2-0 in the first period, and then was a huge role player in the game-winning goal from Andrei Burakovsky. In overtime, he gets the primary assist, I believe, on that goal, notching 2 points for himself in Game 1 of the final at home, sending Ball Arena into an absolute frenzy. And, you know, this is as if this finals was not already hard enough for Stars fans to watch, with the Dynasty Lightning, who knocked the Stars out of the Cup Finals 2 years ago. And then, of course, a division rival that now has, you know, a couple former players, Andrew Cogliano on that team as well, but definitely Val Nichushkin one that burns maybe a little bit more. And, you know, should we feel happy for Val Nichushkin in this situation? Can we feel happy for him? What should we do? How should we approach watching this guy have success with a new team that is a bitter rival to the team that we love and support, a team that it just didn't work out for Nichushkin whenever he was here in Dallas? I mean, his contract was bought out, and that's eventually what led to him being acquired by the Avs. And, you know, it's just such a, you know, difficult thing, because I think a lot of people thought that Nichushkin was maybe kind of a bust of a player, a dud of a player, if you will, whenever his contract got bought out in the summer of 2019. But it's just, you know, we talk about it all the time on this show, and even a lot of times this week, whether, you know, it was with the San Jose Sharks Locked On crossover, talking about Capo Caco. Sometimes a player just needs a change of scenery, and sometimes they're a good player who is just being maybe held back by the situation that they're currently in, or they would be better off in a different situation. And I think that's just where Nichushkin finds himself. Not that Dallas was a bad team by any means. I mean, his last season with the team, they went to Game 7 of the second round of the Western Conference semifinal playoffs, eventually losing to the Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues, although Nichushkin was not a part of that playoff run whatsoever. But, you know, the Stars were not in a bad spot, and clearly the next season proved that as well, making it to the Stanley Cup Finals. But still, you know, now you could say that Nichushkin is on a better team in Colorado, especially given the roster that they have put out night in and night out this season. and that this kind of team, given how they're built, just brings out the best in their players. I mean, Cale Makar is a defenseman unlike anyone else in this league. Nathan MacKinnon is one of the premier offensive forwards in sports right now in the entire league. I mean, he's up there in the same conversation as guys like McDavid or Austin Matthews. And then, of course, you just have so many other great role players. I mean, we've even seen it with Nazem Kadri this season, where he has just kind of come out of his shell in the latter stages of his career. And I think part of that is just due to the fact that Colorado has built this juggernaut of an offense. And I think Nichushkin is another player who is benefiting from that. I mean, this is probably just what he needed. I mean, Dallas, as good of a team as they were back when he was with the Stars, especially at the end of his stint in Dallas, they were a fine team. They had plenty of good offensive weapons. They had Sagan and Ben, who were still producing at a good level. Radulov was still producing. Klingberg was really hitting his stride. You know, you even had the younger guys like Miro and Rupe, who had just kind of emerged on the team. Matt Zuccarello was there. Ben Bishop was in net, and I would argue Ben Bishop in the 2019 playoffs was better than both Francois or Darcy Kemper for the Colorado Avalanche have been these playoffs. I think Bishop was one of the better goalies, similar to what we saw from Jake Ottinger a few months ago against Calgary. So the pieces were there. I just don't know if it was as good as a team that Colorado has put together this season. And now, you know, Nichushkin is not only on the verge of potentially winning a Stanley Cup, he is a free agent this offseason at age 27, so he is likely in line for a pretty decent pay raise, probably one of the last long-term contracts he can sign in his career. And you know, I don't know if it's going to be in Denver. I think especially if the Avs win the Cup and Nichushkin plays a big role, they might look to re-sign him. But also they have tons of other guys on that team who they would want to pay, who are potentially younger, who could potentially contribute to the team long term. So Nichushkin could go somewhere else, and who knows if he can continue to play at the high level that we've seen him play at this season. I think that maybe if he goes to another team, not Colorado, after he gets bought out by the Dallas Stars, maybe he doesn't have as much success, because not very many other rosters in the league are built the way that Colorado has built theirs most recently. So to answer the question, should we and can we be happy for Valeri Nichushkin at this point in his career right now as Dallas Stars fans? As unfortunate as it might sound, or as unwilling as we might be to admit it, I think the answer for me, and I think for most people as well, and I've kind of seen this on Twitter from some people, while I've seen some sadness from others, the answer, I think, is a pretty resounding yes, that we're disappointed that things did not work out here in Texas for Val Nichushkin. Wish that we could have had a player like the way he's playing with the Stars even this past year. I think he could have been a huge help as far as secondary scoring and secondary opportunity goes for this Dallas team. But all in all, this is a guy who was just trying to get his career started, and it just took him a little bit longer than other people to finally unlock his full potential and potentially hit his stride as an NHL player. And so if that means he's able to play for longer and earn money for himself, for his family, I think that's overall a good thing. It's just unfortunate that he's having to do it with a division rival who is potentially on the verge of bringing home a cup for the first time since 2001. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your #1 source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including this year's basketball championship matchup, the NHL Stanley Cup Finals, Major League Baseball, and of course, the latest fighting news from MMA, UFC, and boxing. BetOnline.net currently has the Avs at -1.5 to take Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Finals. You can bet on the Stanley Cup Finals and the NBA Finals and Major League Baseball and all these other sports at BetOnline.net. They are your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline.net, where the game starts. Hey Stars fans, Dane here. We have an important favor to ask you. We've put together a survey so we can learn more about listeners like you and make your favorite Locked On podcast better than ever. This is your opportunity to tell us what you like and don't like about Locked On Podcast. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey right now to get started. It won't take very long, and everyone that completes a survey can qualify for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. To take our audience survey, go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey. Thank you guys so much for your help. Now let's get back to today's episode. All right, we're moving on to the next question of today's mailbag episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for making us your first listen every single day. And the next question has to do with the goalie situation in Dallas. This was a big talking point during the preseason and for the majority of the season, as goalies were just rotating in and out until the final stretch of the season, where Dallas finally had a solidified duo that helped propel them to the playoffs. But as we know, Jake Oettinger is one of the top priorities this offseason as far as getting him re-signed, getting him a big contract that will make him want to stay in Dallas and continue to be the dominant goalie that he has shown to be throughout the early goes of his career. But the question that we have in mind for this segment has to do with the backup goalie. And in this situation, we are talking about Scott Wedgewood. Is Scott Wedgewood the guy that we would want to see as the backup goalie for the Dallas Stars this coming season? And if so, how much should he be paid? Would he be a viable option? Would he be worth keeping on for at least another season or two behind Jake Oettinger? And Wedgwood, I mean, you just take a kind of a bird's eye view look at this. I mean, Wedgwood's story this past season is one of the cooler stories around the NHL. I mean, he played for 3 different teams, including Dallas. That was the final stop of his season. He started out in New Jersey with the Devils, then was sent to Arizona to play with the Coyotes. And then right at the trade deadline, he was sent to Dallas for, I think it was a 4th round pick that was a conditional pick that eventually became a 3rd, I think, in next year's draft for the Coyotes. So Dallas didn't really have to give up a whole lot to get a guy like Wedgwood. He was making below $1 million, $825,000 was his contract. So not a lot of money that they were inheriting. Didn't have to give up a whole lot in order to get him, but they desperately needed backup goaltending with Braden Holtby on LTIR and Anton Hudobin not playing to the level that he had been in the past, but also dealing with a fair share of injuries in his own right. And so he came in and played with the Dallas Stars, and we can all remember his debut with the team in Victory Green in Carolina against the Hurricanes, where he saved 44 out of 47 shots and helped the Stars get the win. He and Roope Hintz were certainly the MVPs of that game. It was one of the more fun games to watch this past season. And then, of course, he had some other big moments as well. He had the shutout at home against the Tampa Bay Lightning in the middle of April. That was also a fantastic game to watch. Tons of fun. Really, really exciting guy to watch as he just kind of got plugged into this team, plugged into the lineup, not looking to take Jake Ottinger's job. Seemed like he and Ottinger had developed some nice chemistry, a really solid friendship, one that looked believable and authentic. But he was also a guy that could come in if Ottinger needed some time off, which was pretty often in the late stages of the season, just with his load that Oettinger had been given. He had been playing a ton just because of the injuries to Holtby and Hudobin, and Ben Bishop obviously not playing. So he was just the perfect guy to come in a situation like this, where the Stars were looking to make the playoffs. The push for the playoffs lasted deep into the season, and he came in and was the perfect backup for Jake Oettinger. He wasn't the perfect goalie. There were still games and moments where, he let way too many pucks go in the net, or he had some off games or some off sequences. But all in all, he was the perfect guy to back up Jake Oettinger, despite not being the perfect goalie, which no goalie is actually perfect, but he did about as well as he could, given the circumstances that he'd been dealing with for the majority of the season. And obviously with his play, I mean, even in some of the games that they lost, I remember he played a game against the Toronto Maple Leafs at home and did a pretty decent job at stopping guys on that Maple Leafs offensive attack. I know Austin Matthews eventually did get the game winner in overtime, but that's a generational scoring talent in today's NHL. So not a whole lot that you can do there if you're Wedgwood, but still he put up a really good effort in that game, as well as many other games this season that I think he has earned a decent pay raise from his $825,000 deal from last season. I personally think that it would be a good idea for the Dallas Stars to keep him on for at least one more season, maybe 1 or 2 more seasons, just because I think there's too much uncertainty with the depth with goalies in this organization. obviously Anton Hudobin, not the guy that he once was while he was healthy this past season. And then health became a big issue. Braden Holtby also starting to get up there in age. Holtby had some nice moments as well, including against the Carolina Hurricanes at home. It was just a bad season to be the Hurricanes trying to stop go against a Dallas Stars goalie this season. But still, Holtby, age and injuries starting to become a little bit of a concern with him. Don't know if he would be a reliable guy to count as our official number 2 goalie on the roster. So with that said, if the Stars can find a way to get Wedgwood back for not a ton of money while still giving him that upgraded paycheck that I think he is due, I think he would be the perfect fit to come back and help provide a little bit of, certainty in the crease for the Stars. Maybe a contract around $1.5 million or maybe slightly less. That seems like a win-win for the Stars to not have to give up a ton of money, especially since they're already looking to give Ottinger a ton of money this offseason. But at the same time, it's a considerable jump from what Scott Wedgewood was making last season. And I think that's something at this point in his career that he could be satisfied with. And if he continues to play well, he could potentially get another decent-sized paycheck from another NHL team once his time with Dallas comes to a close. And the best part about it all is, again, that he would be doing this as a backup. This is a guy that was kind of the go-to guy while he was in Arizona with the Coyotes, but of course the Coyotes, not a playoff contending team, where I think this season Dallas will certainly have aspirations to make it back to the Stanley Cup playoffs. And what Wedgwood could come in and play a key role in that, of being the guy that can give Ottinger those nights off when he needs it. And having that from the get-go at the start of the season, I think will help preserve the health of both players and keep them in tip-top shape, ready to go. And I think they could be one of the better goalie duos in the NHL if, of course, they're both able to stay healthy, and if Wedgwood can come back and give us the same level of production that he gave us this past season with his 8 games with a Dallas Stars sweater on. So with that said, with that question asked, I, of course, would love to see Wedgwood come back if the Stars can get him for a low price while still also giving him a little bit of a pay raise that he has earned from his play with Dallas last season. All right, time to close out today's mailbag episode with our final question from Tex Critter on Twitter. Thank you for sending in a question, for listening to the show. He asked me, I guess, when our big name prospects can be expected to make their NHL debuts, or which guys we could be expecting to debut with the Dallas Stars this season. And so this is definitely a great question to ask. As we've talked about a lot already this offseason, there are a lot of really good prospects to get excited about within the Stars organization, that some of them could certainly be looking to make their NHL debuts in the 22-23 season. And I think that there's 2 guys that certainly fit that billing, I think, in my mind, for sure, unless something really drastic happens during the offseason or training camp. I think we could see these guys debut at the NHL, maybe not on opening night, but certainly they could be getting some play time at some point this season. And I think that is Maverick Bourque, and I think that is Wyatt Johnston. I mean, we've talked about both these guys at length already this season. These are guys that have performed excellently in the CHL. Wyatt Johnston just recently eliminated from the OHL finals in Game 7. Maverick Bourque also playing in the postseason for his team as well in Shawinigan. Both of them having really, really good stints while they've been loaned to their CHL teams. And I think that they certainly have shown the potential to crack an NHL roster in Dallas at some point this season, and I think it would be certainly minutes that are on the bottom 6, not getting just a ton of exposure at the NHL level, but certainly, finding time to get their feet wet and get their experience. Don't think that they'll necessarily be looked at as key players on the roster. Obviously, if they can come in and provide some instant spark plug type offense, I think that could be fantastic as well. But just knowing how these things typically go, I mean, they're not just going to take their big numbers from their teams in Canada and translate that to the NHL instantly. But nonetheless, I think both of those guys have proved that they are ready for some minutes at the big stage in the NHL, which is really, really exciting. And there are some other guys that I think are on the fringe that we might could see, like Logan Stankoven, Antonio Stranges. I think those guys are just right there. They're on the cusp, but maybe not quite ready to make that jump. And obviously, you're not looking to bring everyone to the NHL at the same time. This is something that typically gets spread out. And, you don't see all of these guys make their debuts at once, especially in a situation like this. But I think Johnston and Bourque certainly have the potential. And for Johnston especially, I mean, Mark Savard with the Windsor Spitfires season being done, has now, he's done coaching. So obviously Dallas, at the time of recording this on Thursday afternoon, they are still searching for their new head coach. And I know Pete DeBoer has been heavily discussed in the past few days, but Mark Savard, also a guy that's still on the list and a guy that I would personally still like to at least have considered for the position, especially if Johnston could make his NHL debut. I think that could help Johnston tremendously as he makes the jump from the OHL to potentially the NHL. And also, Mark Savard wore a green tie during Game 7 of the OHL Finals. So not saying that that is a sign of where he wants to go, but that just seems a little coincidental to me. So take with that information and do with it what you will. And as for some other prospects that the Stars have that have already made their NHL debuts, but could still maybe find themselves on the NHL roster this season, you have guys like Ty Delandria. I really liked the way that he played in Game 7 of the first round against Calgary this year. He's obviously, been a guy that's been in and out of the NHL roster throughout the early stages of his career, but I would really like to see him get some more minutes this year, especially in the preseason. I think he's a guy that can make this lineup and this roster very interesting. You have Riley Tufte, Riley Damiani, who both got substantial minutes last season, scoring some goals, getting some points at the NHL level. Really liked what I saw from them overall last season. I think they could also be guys that could see some substantial minutes with the NHL club while also maybe still getting some time at the AHL to continue to develop and improve their game. But those are some guys at the prospect level that I think we could see make their NHL debuts or at least get some really good, solid playing time with the Stars at the NHL level this season. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked on Stars. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, for making us your first listen of the day. Be sure to check out the Locked on NHL podcast as they cover the Stanley Cup Finals like nobody else every Monday through Friday. Local experts covering the best that the NHL has to offer. They are free and available wherever you get your podcast at. Just like the Locked on Stars podcast, be sure to drop a subscription or a follow on your favorite podcasting platform on YouTube. We will be back on Monday with a very special episode. I have a very fun guest joining me on the show. You guys know him as the man who helps get the party going at the American Airlines Center. The one and only DJ Shippy will be joining me on Monday's episode of Locked on Stars. You guys won't want to miss it. It's a very fun interview, and I know you guys will love it. But we will see you there, Stars fans. I hope you have a great weekend.